Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 69. An episode we've been planning since episode 12, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. So this is another group episode and this one's all about the Umbraco CMS. And today I'm joined by Carl Sargunar, Lotte Pitcher, Carole Rennie Logan and Callum Whyte. So welcome to the show everyone.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Before we start, could we go around the virtual table and everyone introduce themselves and tell us a bit about what you do? I'll go to the order of my matrix of webcams. Callum.
Hello, I'm Callum. I am a Umbraco MVP and .NET developer by trade. I've been working with Umbraco for about 10 years, which is something we like to say in the community. I think everyone's been working with it for about 10 years, but I've been working with it for over 10 years. I run a small agency here in the UK. We do Umbraco, .NET and Azure solutions.
Cool. I've not been working it for 10 years, but after this episode, maybe I will start working with it for 10 years because I've not got a go-to CMS at the moment, so maybe we'll see. Next on my webcam of Matrix is Carl.
Hi, I'm Carl Sargunar. I've been working with Umbraco for 11 years. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. I'm just going to start that again. Hi.
10 years in one day.
Yeah. Right. Hi everyone, I'm Carl. I've also been working with Umbraco for about 10 years, on and off in various places. I've been in big agencies, small agencies and freelance. I'm currently freelancing and sort of helping people out build their own Umbraco projects and apps. I also do app development and some Azure development. And like Callum, I'm also a member on a couple of the community teams with Umbraco that I'm sure we'll come to later on.
So next is Carole.
I'm Carol, not to be confused with Carl. I'm the one with the Scottish accent. And I genuinely have also been working with Umbraco about 10 years, like 10, 11 years. So yeah, I've been working with Umbraco and .NET for about 10, 11 years. I was a Java developer before that and mostly kind of working on back-end, very similar to what the guys have said already. So .NET, Umbraco, Azure, integrations, that kind of thing. And in the community, I run a couple of meetups. I'm an Umbraco MVP and Microsoft MVP. And I'm also part of some of the community teams that we'll mention later, I'm sure.
Awesome. I've just realised as I'm looking at the names on the matrix, everyone begins with C except for you and me, Lotte. So we kind of need to change our names maybe.
Do you want to know a secret? My real name is Charlotte. So it really is just you, Dan, but you're Clark. So, you know.
Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
Do you know when Lotte travelled to Charlotte and she sent us a picture of her at Charlotte Airport going, oh, look, they've got a nice welcome for me. It genuinely took my brain a second to be like, what is she talking about? Because she's just Lotte.
Yeah, I've been Lotte since the age of 5. Hi, I'm Lotte. And I have been working with Umbraco for, guess what, just over 10 years. I am a Umbraco and MVC developer. And in half the week, I am now, as of nearly a year, I think. I now actually work part-time at Umbraco in the developer relations team. My job is community cultivation and developer advocacy.
Is this true that everyone's literally been doing it for 10 years?
Well, we kind of round down. So 2011, when the thing is, I'm in denial that I'm getting older. So it's actually 13, but let's call it 10 because then I feel younger, I think. But yes, it does seem to be that everyone's done it. I think because there was a big shift in 2011 when it started supporting Razor, and that suddenly attracted a lot more people, I think. So
the company I work for used it for longer, but I started there in 2013. In the first maybe 6 months or so, I was doing Java stuff and then I switched over to Umbraco. So yeah, genuinely about 10, 11 years.
Yeah, same as me. In fact, the first Umbraco job I had was working at an agency where Carl was the technical director, but we missed each other by about a month. Carl left and I joined, and that was in 2013, so yeah.
Was. And prior to that, I'd worked as lead developer at a different agency, and we've been using Umbraco for about a year or so before that. So 4.7.2 was the first version that I remember using, which is a long time ago. God, I'm old.
But I would like to say there are young people, by young I mean in their 20s, who use the platform as well. So it's not just... Well, Callum, sorry, I forget. You've been around for so long, I forget you're still young, Callum. But I read an article the other day about the greyingness. That wasn't quite the word they used, but open source world is getting greyer and we need more young blood. So I'm just saying we have young blood in Umbraco, it's just none of them are on this podcast.
Well, this age thing, I was in
Apart
denial.
from Callum, who's young. Sorry.
Well, everyone looks quite young here except for me, so it's all good. I was in denial about my age until I had to very recently order some reading glasses.
It's when you start getting invited for health checks at your doctor because of your age.
Oh, I'm way past
This
that.
this is going to sound bad. I can't necessarily relate with the things that have been said here, but my age is now. I have to scroll on the date drop downs, on the age drop downs. It used to be always within the first few options, but not anymore.
So you don't get RSI from scroll.
Isn't the drop down on like 10 entries though?
I guess it depends, doesn't it?
How young are you?
It's when the age, isn't it? The age used to default to like close to my age, and then now it's like, you need to scroll. But I think it gets to a certain point, at least career wise, I don't know about in life, but in career, when actually it's quite fun to be that kind of older, more experienced dev, to be like, you get to a meeting, say things like, I have got 14 years industry experience, or things like that, whereas you work really hard to be able to say that, rather than when you're the junior and you're like, I've got 2 years experience, so I'm embracing being able to say things like that.
Well, my next big one in a few years is 50, so...
Oh, that's
number.
exciting. What are you going to have a party? Invite all your podcast guests.
Oh, that'd be a good one, won't it? Like, just get every single guest that's ever been on.
Yeah.
I think I need to do something big for my 100th episode.
Yeah.
Not 100th
sorry.
birthday, 'cause that's a long time away.
Yeah.
So you're planning your 100th birthday pretty soon.
It feels like it. What are we on now? It's kind of, what did I say it was? Episode 69. So yeah, so we're not that far off 100, so I need to plan something big. Anyway.
Callum, what did you do for Umbraco a few years ago? Well over 100 episodes. What did you do for 100?
Yeah, we've got 300 and something episodes. We did. The 100th episode was actually a live. We skipped a week so we could do it live at a UK festival. I think
I think
2018 or 2019 that would have been. But yeah, we've since done 200, 250, 300. Lots of those were in lockdown as well, so that was kind of frustrating that we couldn't do something big. But we've stopped counting them now. We used to do a weekly episode. We've gone monthly because it's just a little bit too much work.
That is impressive. Do you edit as well, or do you just record and then publish?
No, we do. We hit go and whatever happens. So, yeah.
Yeah, I spend too much time editing with this one. But yeah, well, speaking of live episodes, Carl, we had, was it a couple of episodes ago, 2 episodes ago? We had the DDD conference.
2 or 3 episodes ago.
Live panel with a live audience. So that was really good. That was a couple of episodes ago, yeah.
Yeah, I listened, and there was a few voices that I recognised on there, which was nice.
You had Rachel Breeze on, I think.
Yeah, Rachel, Purnima, and then a few others from the .NET community in the Southwest. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It was a kind of very last-minute organisation. Oh, we've got a lunchtime slot, and we're not doing anything of a lunchtime slot for DDD Southwest, which is one of the festivals I help organise over here. And yeah, we just got chatting with Dan, and I thought, can we do this? Can we wangle something? And Dan turned up with this amazing kit. Like, it was all plugged in, and we had their wireless mics all hooked up, and yeah, with the last minute, we managed to make it work. It was good fun.
The Southwest is a bit of a melting pot for Umbraco people, so I saw pictures from that podcast. I couldn't make it, unfortunately, but I'm also originally from Bristol, so that's sort of my my home turf. And like at least half of the people in the audience of that podcast were Umbraco community adjacent as well, so that's really cool.
Oh, that's very cool. We actually had, with the DDD conferences, which I absolutely love, I can't remember which episode, it was a couple of years ago, we had a group episode with like Jess White and a whole bunch of others, and talking specifically about the DDD conferences.
Yeah.
So that was great fun.
I remember that one because you had all your musical instruments in it, didn't you? So
yeah, we suddenly realised that everyone in the background had a guitar or something, and so I took it exactly. Oh no, mine's in the other room, I think somewhere. Yeah, I need to like just rearrange so I've got a guitar always behind me. Anyway, so before we fully start digging into Umbraco, just a quick reminder to the listeners that this podcast has its own Discord community, and if you head over to the website unhandledexceptionpodcast.com, you'll see a big Discord link there. And also a thank you to Everstack for sponsoring the podcast. Everstack is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And lastly, speaking of sponsors, the show is currently looking for additional sponsors. If you're interested, the details are on the website. So let's dig into Umbraco. Let's dig into our new world record. in the length of time to arrange a podcast recording. Was it March 2021, were you saying before, Carl?
That's right, yeah. The Google Doc with our original show notes and discussion points was shared around March 2021. And
so it had reference to the fact that Umbraco.NET Core version was in beta or something. No, it was a release candidate or whatever the term was they were using for it, alpha or something. So that's how long ago. Umbraco wasn't even in .NET Core land yet.
yeah, back when it took a good 3 or 4 years for a version number to increase in .NET world.
So is it in .NET Framework at all now, or is it just .NET? Or I can't say .NET Core now, just .NET.
Just .NET, yeah. .NET LTS, I suppose. Yeah, fully in .NET now, as far as I'm aware. All of the packages and everything that can run on Umbraco, which is, I'm sure, something we'll chat about. Lottie's our expert there. But all of the packages and all the ecosystem and everything is fully on new .NET, long-term support .NET, whatever you want to call it. It has been for a few years now. But the last version actually that supports, the last supported version, I should say, that supports framework is out of support officially in February. So as of February, there's officially no .NET framework around in Umbraco land, but I'm sure there'll still be some legacy sites kicking around, but hopefully as developers we all don't have to support that for much longer.
I think with the rearranging of dates for recording dates, it's actually worked quite well because you've recently had the Code Garden conference, which is an Umbraco conference, I believe.
Yeah, the annual developer conference in Denmark called Code Garden, which, was about a month ago now, although it feels like about a week ago. There's about 600-700 people in person and then several hundred watching online as well. 3 days in Odense, which is not Copenhagen. Everyone goes, oh, it's in Denmark. I love Copenhagen. Well, I love getting the train from Copenhagen. But it's a great 3 days, and it's where I think the community really comes together and gets invigorated and inspired and just has a good time. As I think probably we all know the benefits of technical conferences. It really is inspiring, and you get to talk to people you wouldn't normally talk to and learn new things and do some weird and wonderful things.
Hearing someone describe Code Garden as a technical conference is both great and also just incredibly strange, because I think for anyone that's been will say that it's not just a tech conference, but it's more of an experience with opportunities to meet lots of people. It's a very friendly community, lots of slightly weird and wonderful activities as well that you wouldn't expect from a typical tech conference. So it feels like the least tech conference I've probably attended.
Yeah, I think a lot of work goes into the stuff around the talks. So the stuff that happens, the attendee experience. So when people arrive, you get met with high fives and someone on stilts and various things. There was a buck and bronco there for a day that you got time to see who could stay on for the longest. A lot of thought goes into what you do in the evening, and we try and keep everyone. It's a Friday. I work from Umbraco on Friday, so I say we instead of them. We try and keep everyone together for as long as possible. If they want to, you're not obliged to stay until sort of 11 o'clock at night, but there are things to do at the venue if you want to. So it is a really good opportunity to talk to people with lots of ice-breaking activities going on. Like, Dan, have you ever played Hammerschlagen?
I haven't, but it sounds alcoholic.
It isn't. It involves a very large log, and you bang nails into a log, and it's a game that you play big in Scandinavia. And it's one of those things you just get 6 random people standing around a log, and that's how you make friends, is by hopefully not blinding them.
I need to get to more conferences because we mentioned the DDD, so those are the main ones I go to. But even I was listening to actually, is it Lotte and Carole that have the, Candid Contributions podcast?
Yeah.
So I was listening to one of your recent ones, which was about the MVP summit. And I keep on wanting to go to that, but it's because it's kind of like a chunk of time and you've got to fly over, and I'm a contractor, so I'm not earning on those days I go. So it becomes quite an expensive conference to go to, but I really need to get to one of those one time. But you sound on the podcast episode, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. It sounded such fun.
I wasn't expecting it to be as much fun, to be honest, but I don't know why. It was my first time, my first year as a Microsoft MVP. But of course, everyone's really nice and we have so much in common that the conversation is very easy. And I think I was lucky I was there with a couple of friends, so I wasn't completely on my own, which made it a lot easier. But I would suggest, Dan, because you've been renewed, I understand the dates are out, book your flights as soon as possible, because then it's somewhat cheaper.
Yeah, I've never been either, Dan, because I became the MVP December 2020, so there was no travel for a while. And this year I just wasn't able to make it. But I felt like I was there when I was listening to Lotte and Emma. It's quite nice to be able to listen to your own podcast when you're not in it, because then it's just like you're listening to some friends having a chat, which is what it was. So, but yeah, hopefully one year I'll get to make it along.
I became a Microsoft MVP March 1st, 2020, and it was the weekend of DDD North. It was like February 29th was DDD North. And I remember being sat in a hotel lobby in Hull, of all places, with people like Pete Gallagher, who'd only recently just been awarded as a Microsoft MVP, and there was a TV screen on the wall, and they were playing all these scenes from what was going on in China, and people were getting a bit nervous because the MVP summit was coming up a few weeks later, and people had flights booked and they were planning to go, and I was thinking, one day this would be lovely if I was to ever get accepted. I'd known at this point, of course, that I'd submitted all the things for the MVP award, but I didn't know I was going to get it, and I came home to an email saying congratulations, which was an awesome feeling. And then I was like, maybe I could, it's 3 weeks away, maybe I could try and squeeze in a trip to Seattle or something like this. And then, of course, everything came crashing down 3 weeks later. So I said, if I ever get the opportunity to go the MVP Summit, I'm going to take it. First chance I possibly can. And, well, yeah, I did. Thankfully, 2 years back, I went to the first in-person one since COVID, and I've just been feeling ever so lucky to be renewed since that. I get to go again and again. So yeah, it's a really great experience. I think my highlight is being able to talk to people like Mads Torgersen just one-on-one. Sits down and has lunch with you, and you can talk about C# and where your gripes are with the language or the direction it's going in. And Mads has got incredible insight and can really give you some great information, or takes notes as well. Like, he really cares. He really wants to listen to the community. And that's not something you get in many other contexts, being able to talk to someone like Mads on that level. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you can go.
I love the fact that all the names you've just mentioned have been on the podcast. So we had Mads up recently, who's been on the podcast, which was quite cool. Pete Gallagher, he's been on a few times actually, he's awesome. But we've just realised that, I think we've spoken about this before, but we really need to get Carl nominated, because we were talking about this a bit ago. And yeah. Claire, if you're listening, look up Carl, because he really, really, really deserves it.
Oh, thank you.
So much so that I think people just think that Carl's an MVP.
I've been meaning to do it for so long. I just have it. It's on my to-do list. I need to reach out to Claire. I did speak to her a couple of years ago during the pandemic, in the lockdown years. I was like, okay, I didn't feel like back then I'd done enough, but yeah, maybe I'll reach out.
It's not for you to decide though, Carl. You submit everything you've done and they decide.
DDD Southwest, .NET Southwest, I think you're doing a lot.
Yeah, you're in a community group that I'm in, Carl. You do so much. I actually forget that you're not an MVP, and I think loads of other people probably assume you're an MVP too.
Well, maybe we can organise a podcast trip for the next one, because I've not been to, obviously, not an MVP. So when Dan, you go, let us know. We'll organise a reunion all ahead over there.
Hello, future editor Dan here. Just jumping in to say that I've just checked with Claire, who we just mentioned. She is the community program manager for UK and Ireland MVPs. I wanted to make sure she didn't mind her name being mentioned. She said it was fine, and she also asked if I could say that if listeners want to reach out and speak to her about the MVP program, that's totally fine, and I will include a link in the show notes with her contact details. Sorry for the interruption, and back to the show.
Back to Code Garden just quickly though, like you were saying about Mads Torgersen at being at MVP Summit. He actually came as a guest to Code Garden last year, and that was a really good opportunity to actually just catch up and chat with him. And as you say, he's such a friendly, approachable guy. Just seeing him walk around and grabbing a coffee and just saying hi and having a chat with him was really awesome. And the nice thing about the Code Garden Summit conference is it's not just Umbraco people. It's been kind of bring a lot of other. It's not a developer conference. There's talks on lifestyle, and there's talks on mental health. There's talks on all kinds of things. So yeah, it's really good for that. You don't have to be a developer to be there. In fact, a lot of people who do go aren't developers, and they go for the editor experience or the community side of things. Sustainability is a really, really big push in the community right now, and has been for a few years.
Yeah, with it being a .NET based CMS as well, on the back end at least, we do get quite a lot of folks that also do .NET stuff all day long. So we've had some, I'm not involved with the organised, I just mean community, but we've been lucky enough to have, we had like Maria from the .NET team give a great talk. We've had, I think, Scott Hanselman remotely, and a few other folks from the .NET team, which is pretty cool.
I guess going back to, we were talking about MVPs and we're kind of like talking about the Microsoft MVP Summit in that context, but doesn't Umbraco also have an MVP program?
It does, which I'm no longer a member of because I didn't get renewed because I now work there.
But you really work 5 days, Lotte. You just
get paid for less, yeah.
Paid for 3.
But yeah, we reached the happy number of 100 Umbraco MVPs this June.
Yeah.
And I think, oh gosh, I can't quite remember, 17, 20 new ones this year, I think, something like that. And definitely not all developers, which we're quite proud of because we appreciate being part of this community is not just doing code pull requests. It's very much not doing pull requests. In fact, probably I would think most of the MVPs in the last year probably haven't done pull requests. In fact, it's organising meetups, it's giving opinions and advice. It is just being part of the world and writing blog posts on whatever you want to write about that will be of interest to someone who does Umbraco. And like Carl says, at Code Garden, lots of the talks aren't just about code because there are lots of other things, the core skills, not soft skills, we call them core skills, don't we? The core skills that we all need to work on to become better team members and things like that. So one of my highlight talks from Code Garden this year was from Yucca, which was about how to be a good manager and how to run a remote team. Things like give people advance notice of what you want to talk about in a meeting so people can prepare for them. Some really useful things that that anyone can take back to their work. And that sort of input is stuff that we really value in our world as well. So yes, 100 Umbraco MVPs now, I think, which is a good number.
That's been one of the really cool things from the outside to see evolve over, I guess, the 10 years. I get 8 years that I've really been involved with community probably, but from the size of the HQ, but also the maturity of the MVP program. So I think the MVPs, I think the first year that I was around, I wasn't an MVP, but was maybe the first year that they acknowledged or valued, I can't think of the right word, rewarded people that weren't doing code or forum contributions. Because I think it used to be karma based, like on the forum, or people that are doing the most code contributions. And I think the year that I first attended, Lotte, you and a bunch of other community meetup organisers got rewarded in it with an MVP because they recognised how valuable that was rather than pure code contributions. And then that was still only, I don't know, a small group, probably less than 20 MVPs that they awarded per year. And then it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the program's got more and more mature, which has been really, really cool to see over the 8 years how the HQ and the MVP program has evolved.
I believe it used to be 5 MVPs awarded, and it was basically the top 5 most voted for people on the forum. And it meant that you got a very small, very select group of people being awarded each time and was not, not very inclusive. So, it's definitely a vast improvement.
It was I believe, 20-person shortlist from the 20 most active people in the forums, and then people could vote on who are their 5 favourite. And that isn't quite how we want to do it anymore. Yeah.
I think my first Code Garden was the first year that it changed and they had some of the new way of doing it. So I think, Lotte, that you, Ginny and Erica were actually the first women that were awarded as MVPs, which was awesome. With my first Code Garden, to be sitting in the keynote watching that and seeing you all rewarded was awesome.
Yeah, I did have people coming up to me saying that it was pretty awesome seeing a woman up there accepting an MVP award because it made them think, oh, I can do it too, which they definitely can, of course.
It definitely was.
Yeah.
It definitely was. It was awesome.
That's something I hear quite a lot when female guests have been on the show and they're talking about being a female developer. One thing they always say is that they really they get lots of people coming up to them and saying, because I've seen you do it, it means I can do it as well. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, and the visibility of it's actually been really important with Umbraco. I'm on the diversity and inclusion community team. It's one of the teams that I work with Umbraco, and that's supported by HQ. So they've actually got HQ people on the team as well. And one of the things that they try and do is to actually get more visible women as speakers. And that's not just to make up numbers, because there are so many awesome women speakers and developers out there, but it's not always easy to encourage them to come along. But this year in Umbraco, there were such a huge range of speakers, not just speakers, but also guests at the conference. I think it was up to 35% of speakers, which was, I'm sorry, Lotte probably has more accurate numbers than I do.
Yeah, sorry, I think it was, I don't know off the top of my head, but it was around that 35-40%, yeah.
Yeah, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's all kinds of diversity as well, so it's great that we've seen, that's certainly one thing that's seen Lotte up there and everyone else was made a big difference, but it's even just, whatever your the thing is that makes you different. So for a while, this accent, I was really, really self-conscious of being different, speaking at conferences. There weren't speakers that sounded like me, certainly not at events in UNSA, but being able to get that opportunity to be that person. And then when you go to events and there's other Scottish people or other Glaswegian people, and I'm sure it's the same for all these different demographics that people fall into. If you can see it, you can be it kind of thing. Or if you can hear it in the accent. But yeah, I think it's important. And that's why I think having a global community, but also a really localised community is really important, because then you can nurture, your Bristol one that you mentioned earlier, or the London one, which has always been pretty popular and well attended and things like that as well, that Lotte and Callum look after. And being able to have diversity of all different types of people in the community. I'm on the same team as Carl, and that's something that we're actively trying to keep doing as the community grows, which is hard as it grows, right? It's much easier to get 35% of a small attendee number or a small speaker number, but as the community gets huge, 30% of huge is huge. So yeah, it's hard to grow.
You made me laugh speaking about accents. On one of my recent YouTube videos, someone replied saying, "Awesome video, but your accent is brutal." And it was kind of like, oh, thanks. It was so funny.
Luckily, people quite like, Americans tend to like a Scottish accent. I don't know about like Brits or Europeans, but Americans tend to like it. So I remember when I was speaking at .NET Conf, getting comments like, "Oh, what's that accent? That's a cool accent." So, yeah.
Do you have a telephone voice, Carole?
This is my telephone voice, Callum.
No, but I mean,
yes.
I mean, we only ever see you like this. But you'll
probably
a thicker version of your accent.
Yeah, probably. Like when we're speaking and having dinner after the conference, I'll probably talk a bit different than I'm talking now. I had a joke where she was visiting Glasgow, and when I was speaking to my husband, she was like, "Oh, you sound very different." Even just speaking to a friend versus another Glaswegian. But I'm sure we all have that.
Your voice is very clear, though, so it's very so it's very easy to understand. Unlike mine, I've been told.
No, not at all.
So we've spoken a lot about community. We should also probably dig into Kentico itself. I guess like
Umbraco.
You just said Kentico. Just proving we're listening.
Oh dear! I'm so glad you were listening. That would have been so embarrassing. The thing is, if I re-record anything during editing, it's obvious because it sounds different in a different time. I don't know why, but it's kind of
the background noise is different and everything.
There's always things that are different. So I'm glad you picked me up on that, because I'd have been like, no. What was I saying anyway? Oh yes. So I don't know which bits I said Kentico about. I'm not going to be able to talk now. Someone say something. No, so
we're talking about the community and then moving it on to the actual CMS itself.
Yeah, I can remember. I just can't talk, so I'm trying not to laugh. Do you really get the giggles?
Yeah. Nobody look.
Camera's off.
So I'll say something.
Yeah, someone else talk,
but how do you say Umbraco? Because I think you say it different than me. And Carl, how do you say it?
I go Umbraco, yeah.
So you're not an Umbraco? Because I think some people from Bristol and that kind of area say Umbraco.
Yeah, no, I'm not really a Bristolian. I just live here, but I'm not a local in the sense. I mean, I've been here for 20 years, so I suppose.
Callum, would you naturally call it Umbraco before you were a Londoner?
Umbraco. I think I've always been around the community, and that's, I feel like the accepted.
Yeah,
widely accepted pronunciation. But there's the famous video from Code Garden, I think in 2009 or something, where someone said, "So we're going to answer the question once for all, how do you pronounce Umbraco?" And they ask 15 people, and every single one of them pronounces it completely differently. So I don't think there is maybe an official pronunciation. But
no, well, there's
Umbraco.
The CEO of Umbraco calls it Umbraco, being a Dane, but I don't think there is. As long as you're talking about it and saying the word, that's all that matters, right? Doesn't matter how you pronounce it. As long as you don't pronounce it Kentico, that's all that matters.
I would have edited out that bit, but the listeners won't have context, but maybe I'll leave that in. We'll see. I guess as a non-Umbraco user, I would just say Umbraco, I guess. Is that acceptable? Or I guess it's fine.
No, a lot of people who aren't in the community, like Umbraco is a very popular way of doing it. A lot of my clients say, "Oh, so this Umbraco system, what's it about?" I think, no, Umbraco is fine. Umbraco, I don't know, however else you could, Umbraco.
It's similar to Azure. You got I'd say Azure, but some people say Azure, or there's a whole bunch of different ways of saying that.
I noticed that in the introductions, everyone said it completely differently. I think the only unacceptable pronunciation of Umbraco is Umbraco, which I've heard Americans and Australians say, but I think we can all agree that's terrible.
That's wrong. Yeah. You're right. You found the wrong pronunciation.
I thought you were going to say the only unacceptable pronunciation is Kentico.
That joke's already been done.
Yeah.
Lotte beat me to it again.
Comedy, though, isn't it? It's just doing callbacks to things that made people laugh earlier.
The only wrong way to say it is Kentico.
Just like
We can all have a go, and then
like,
Dan can pick the one that he likes better.
pick your favourite. Are we just like forking other people's jokes at this point? Like,
Clever, Carol. Clever.
So anyway, we've spoken enough about Kentico. If you do want to hear more about Kentico, though, there was an episode back in 2021 where I had Matt Neild on, and we were talking about Kentico, but that's not this episode, so let's talk about Umbraco, whatever it is. So we've spoken a lot about community. Let's talk about Umbraco itself. Obviously, you all chose Umbraco as a CMS. What made you make that choice, and did you actually try other ones? Was there a pro that made you choose that over the other ones?
If you were picking a CMS now, it would be very different to when we all picked a CMS, because back then it was a very different beast. You had .NET Framework, you had a recent edition of MVC, but XSLT was sort of the primary language most people were working with Umbraco in. And so nowadays it's this lean and very powerful CMS with lots of extension points. It wasn't necessarily the case back before.
XLST is in the XML parsing.
yeah, so all of the content was all in the database as XML once upon a time. It's all JSON now. So there was a lot of XML. As I suppose there was a lot when we were working in .NET Framework Land anyway, of working in XML because our config and everything.
XML was the standard back then before JSON got quite so popular.
Yeah. So when I started working with it, it was chosen for me, I suppose, as my answer, because I was working at an agency where they worked in .NET. It was open source and therefore suitable for certain size of projects, and they tried it out and it worked well. And then I came along, started working with them, and then started working on projects with that. I have worked with other CMSs though as well. I'm also certified with another .NET non-open source CMS, or DXP, seems to be the buzzword that CMSs are using now. But yeah, the reason that people stay working with it, I suppose, is, I think, as a developer anyway, developer friendliness of it, being able to get up and running and working on it relatively quickly. Of course, it being open source has several advantages of, one, you can jump in and see how it's working, but two, it's free. And also the edited experience as well has got a lot better, so our clients can use it a lot easier. They therefore don't have to come to us for updates, and then everyone's happy. So I think that's probably the main reasons that developers work with it. I think there probably was a while where it wasn't as developer friendly because the tech stack was aging on the front end and the back end. That's maybe something we can get into a bit later, but now with the front end very recently modernised and the back end, as we said, moved over to .NET Core a few years ago, I think it's a whole lot developer friendly for a whole new generation of developers rather than us folks that used it in the past from our .NET Framework experience.
So if a new developer, say one of the listeners that's never used it before, and they come in and they want to start a new project, a new website, what does that look like if you want to do it with Umbraco? Is it file new projects, kind of? Is there a template, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah. So there are .NET templates for it, so you can install the .NET template. And in fact, one of the community tools that I think a lot of people have started to use is one of the members called Paul Seal, who's created an excellent site called PSW. I don't know what it stands for.
Package script writer, is it?
Package script writer, psw.codeshare.co.uk, and you can basically go there and just copy a script which will install the template, start a new site, create the solution for you, and if you want to, it'll also install a skinned starter pack so you can get an idea of how the CMS works behind the scenes. And that's a really good way of, as long as you have the .NET SDK installed in your machine, you'll be able to kind of get up and running with very, very little time. That has become, that's one of the new modern conveniences that we have that we kind of didn't have back in the old days. It was Visual Studio a NuGet package and then having to create websites and add them to it, which you can still do. You can still go do it the NuGet way. But right now it's very, very quick to get started with an opinionated sort of starter kit. But one of the nicest things about Umbraco is that it isn't too opinionated. It gives the developer a lot of free will, a lot of control over how they want to structure their site and how they want it to work. So, if you want to structure your site one particular way, you don't have to be dictated to. You're not. WordPress, for example, is quite opinionated in how they want you to structure your site. Other CMSs as well. I won't mention others right now, but with Umbraco, you've got a lot of freedom, not just in how you structure your content, but also how you structure your views, how you structure your front end of your site. It doesn't impose too many restrictions on you. You can basically build it as long as you can build it in any front end framework you want to. And one of the nice things that has been introduced with version 12 of Umbraco, so a few versions ago, is the Content Delivery API, which is effectively a headless API to get access to your content. So you're no longer restricted to using a templating engine. You don't have to build it in Razor. You could build it with React or with Vue.js or one of the other front-end JavaScript frameworks and actually populate your site that way. So you can kind of get as complicated as you wanted to, or if you wanted to just start really simple, go check out psw.codeshare.co.uk and shout out to Paul Seal for that excellent site, because you can be up and running very quickly, log into the back end of Umbraco. One of the nice things as well is it also runs SQLite and not just SQL Server, so you don't even need to have kind of massive database dependencies to install, which gets you up and running even faster.
Nice. Does it work with Docker?
Yes, it does. And in fact, thank you for your help with that, Dan, because when I was just starting my Docker journey, I reached out. This was in the pandemic time, and you gave me a few excellent pointers. And I'm sure there's also a shout out to a course coming soon, which is a really, really excellent course, by the way. If you haven't done it already, Dan's course on Docker and Kubernetes on Dome Train are both excellent courses. I will definitely recommend those. But yeah, when Umbraco went full .NET Core, one of the first things that I was able to do in the kind of community is kind of get up and running and say, hey, will this run on Linux? Will it run on a Raspberry Pi? Will it run in Docker and containers? And yes, it does, which is now opened up a huge community of other technologies that we can play with, especially with it now being able to run headlessly. So your content is now a part of your bigger application. It is not necessarily just a whole thing in itself. You can work with massive applications, and it's interesting to see what other people are building out there with it.
I was going to just plug there as well. On the whole, you can run Umbraco anywhere. I've done a talk and a few articles, or several talks and a few articles on this topic, where you can run, because it's just .NET Core, you can run this on Xamarin or a Maui app and use features of the APIs directly within that. You can run it on Azure Functions, and you can run it anywhere. So if you don't need just the CMS, you just need the API bits, you can do exactly that. It's just a .NET dependency that you install and you consume like you would any other tool or any other database, for example.
I think that's a good point to say, is like most of your audience being the kind of .NET developers, it's just a .NET application ultimately. So if you do want to use it non-headlessly, then it's just a Razor, it's just an MVC site. You mostly works in the Razor views from the templates by default, but you can add controllers. Before they had headless delivery APIs, we all just ended up building web API controllers to do those things anyway. So it really is just a .NET solution. It just happens to be using Umbraco as a database set of APIs, whatever way you want to look at it, to then give an admin front end to your users so that you don't get asked to change things that developers don't like having to spend time changing and deploying, like content and things like that. So I'd say to folks, just jump in. And I don't use the word just lightly, right? I hate when people say, yeah, just do this, and it's like super complex. If you're already a .NET developer, like Carl says, if you go to the PSW site, you'll get a CLI command you can copy and you can paste in, and it will spin it all up for you. And it's really good for folks getting started that have never worked with Umbraco before. If you've worked with .NET, I think the .NET team have done really well since probably .NET 5, I'd say, at making .NET more accessible to folks that weren't .NET developers before. I think even in Core LAN, maybe up until 3.1, it was kind of like, well, this is .NET Core, but you kind of needed to have worked with .NET Framework before to kind of get what's going on here. Whereas I think from kind of .NET 5, they made a real effort to try and get it easier for new coders or for coders that haven't worked with .NET before and so on, like making the CLI more friendly, the .NET templates, some of the things that maybe are more controversial to some people, but like, having to being able to have everything in a single file and stuff like that. I think Umbraco have done the same, is what I'm trying to say, like making it much more approachable for developers that are new to it.
they've tried their best to align with the way that .NET is doing things as well, rather than inventing their own ways of handling things. It's very much just a .NET platform, and we use that in our day-to-day work because we can plug it in with all these external .NET systems, dependencies, approaches that we would use regardless of Umbraco. It just gives us a few extra tools to allow a user to manage content and things, from marketing sites all the way up to, we build full loyalty systems for airlines, for example, with this. So
that's so true, Callum, actually, because in the framework land, there was the Umbraco way to do things. I think the team made the right choice when they were moving to .NET Core to follow what .NET were doing, and then mostly do the Umbraco layer on top, the .NET way as well. Even when it comes to dependency injection and things like that, it just made life a whole lot easier. And it's so much easier to onboard .NET devs as well if they've never worked with Umbraco before.
Yeah, it explains the new cadence for the releases as well, because, for example, in November, .NET 9 is coming out, and I think it's 2 days after that, the Umbraco release that is going to be on .NET 9 is coming out. So it's falling into place and just being as up to date on .NET as can be. And if I may just put my corporate hat on for a moment, if you do just want to try Umbraco, you can get a free 2-week trial of Umbraco Cloud. It's the Umbraco as a service solution called Umbraco Cloud. So you can register for that for 2 weeks. And I don't usually say things like that, but they're paying my wage today, so I should say. But for free for 2 weeks. But otherwise, just getting started. It is just like a .NET. It is a .NET application, as you say, Carol. It's not just like one. It is a .NET application, and anything you can do in .NET, you can do in Umbraco. Any front end you want to use. Sometimes, if you do start without a starter kit and you install it and you log into the back office for the first time, because you've got all this flexibility, you've then got this big blank screen, and it's like, sort of, how do I start? What do I do? And that's where starter kits and sort of looking to the community to see how people have tried to help people get started. But that comes at the benefit of the fact that there is nothing being forced upon you. There is no sort of prescription about how you can go around structuring your pages, your sites, because obviously not everything in a CMS is a page for a start. So who knows what you're wanting to store in your content management system. So the flexibility comes sometimes at a bit of a cost for the beginner, but hopefully there are tools around now that help.
Do you find that people that are creating sites now you've got a concept of headless, what kind of ratio do you find where new websites are created just without headless versus using headless so that they can use like React, Angular and that kind of thing? What's the default that you find people do?
So we've actually, and I say we as in the team I work in, but I know pretty much everyone else here as well. We've been building kind of headless, or at least hybrid kind of headless sites. I gave a talk at Code Garden 2017, I think, about working headlessly in Umbraco when there was nowhere near headless Umbraco available at that point. And I know I wasn't the only one that was doing that. I'm not saying it was absolutely novel at the time, but I was a talk about, okay, so we have our website content, we're using it the traditional way and Razor templates, but also we're needing to use we want the client to be able to use this content. I'm going to use a real buzzword. You've done corporate Lotte, so I'm going to do corporate Carol and say omni-channel. So people want omni-channel content. So rather than having to have that held in separate places, you can have it in one CMS and then it's used on your website, on your mobile app, on your big screen in the foyer, so on and so on. Alexa skills was the thing at the time as well. So we were using content on that. But there wasn't any way within the CMS to do that, but it was .NET. So we built web API controllers and we built that on top of the solution. So to answer your question, folks have kind of been doing that hybrid sort of approach for a long time. Most sites that I work on, they're probably still hybrid. Like there's the headed website and then there's the headless content that might be used. Callum mentioned like booking systems. I do a lot of booking systems and things like that. So if it's for the brochure website, it tends to be the headed way. And then once you get into, dynamic kind of single page apps and Angular and React and things like that, that's when I would then use the headless content delivery APIs. Whereas we used to have to build them ourselves. Now they just come out of the box.
Yeah, I think it's quite an ideological decision for a team if they are building headless as their default or MVC as their default. It's often what we see. I think we lean more towards MVC with hybrid elements like Carol mentions, but we do have some fully headless projects in the pipeline as well. If your team's not using, say, modern JavaScript frameworks extensively, then it probably doesn't make sense, and you just build a website in a traditional way using MVC, and that's fine. Building headless systems is also quite complicated at larger scale, and if you're doing things like membership, for example, membership becomes much more complex at headless scale, and it just presents new different challenges. So I think people often maybe fall back to the traditional old way of doing things with MVC and don't realise some of the possibilities with headless as well. So I feel like headless is potentially an untapped area of the Umbraco ecosystem. Something people have been doing a long time, but maybe not to its full potential. So yeah, we're doing both.
I also feel with some clients, though, or just some folks in general, like we need a headless CMS, and I always start with asking why. Why headless? It's a bit like the DXP thing. Like, what features would you like of headless? And sometimes they absolutely do need headless, and sometimes it's because they've been told they need a headless CMS. Do you know? So I always start with asking people, why do you think headless? Because in some ways it's great, there's great advantages, but then there's some things that you just get when you're doing it in Razor that you need to spend a lot of time getting right when you're doing it headlessly. Maybe less so now, but I know traditionally getting SEO right when things were all headless and single page apps was a challenge. So yeah, I always will stop and ask people, okay, what's the right way to do it rather than what's the buzz one at the moment? Well, they want headless CMS and it's possible now, so let's do it that way. I always stop and say, what is the right thing for this project? Coming
back to that idea of, aligning with the way that the industry's going, and with .NET especially, Umbraco's new delivery API is also all conformant to OpenAPI specs. So that is OpenAPI spec that you can then consume, generate a client from, and on the front end you have to just call your client rather than calling a bespoke endpoint or something that you've created yourself. And that's made it far more approachable, more realistic for us to build big headless systems when a client does say they want it, even maybe after the fact. We don't have to build it later. We can generate those specs and we can understand what our system is and does and all of its features. And then, we can literally build out a front end relatively quickly with modern technologies and not having to worry so much about rewriting whole parts of front end. I think that's been hugely powerful. So it's not so much of you've got to make that decision at the start now. You can literally flip a switch, align a config, and have Umbraco in a headless mode. And there's some great community packages that help out with that as well. It's so it's very traditional actually in that sense. It's like every other headless product. Now, finally, it's taken 10 years really to get there, but yeah.
That's very cool. I tend to not be able to have an episode of this podcast without talking about testing, because I'm obviously a big fan of testing. Is there a testing framework for Umbraco, or how does that work?
So I know as part of the new front-end rebuild, which is a whole other thing we can go into, long story short, goodbye to Angular, finally, and hello to just JavaScript and TypeScript. Playwright was brought in as part of that, so I'm not a front-end developer, so you'll tell that I'm less confident in talking about this, but I know that Playwright was brought in, and at one of the hackathons I certainly had a play around with it, so I know that a lot of folks were happy just in general that there was going to be more testing, and too that it was Playwright. And it's actually going to that hackathon and seeing Umbraco Playwright stuff was what made me have a play around with Playwright for my non-Umbraco projects too, just to get to know it, which is another advantage of going along to things like hackathons and meetups, because even if you don't end up contributing to the open source product, you still learn about a thing you can use in your day job.
So you're a play with Playwright.
Play with Playwright, exactly. I don't know if anyone else knows more about the front end. I was going to say migration, it's a rewrite really.
I'll also be talking waffle a bit, but I think I know a little bit more. The way Umbraco's done their Playwright setup is there's a bunch of helpers and core tests that we can extend. So as an implementer, you can implement your own. If you're building, say, an extension for the CMS, you can actually utilize a lot of the plumbing Umbraco's done to set up auth, etc. in the Playwright tests, which is really cool. And then actually from a backend perspective, since the .NET Core migration, Umbraco has spun out a separate NuGet package called Umbraco CMS Testing, I think. And that has a whole bunch of, again, boilerplate for unit testing of backend code. So if you're building custom extensions or wanting to unit test elements of your project, then you can do that. Of course, with the rewrite with NetCore, they moved everything to be fully dependency injectable as well. So you can now mock large parts of the CMS, and people are doing that. I think it's maybe criminal to say this. I don't think people are writing, full extensive test suites for all of their projects in the Umbraco world. There's definitely some people who are. My experience is most people aren't, but people, especially building extensions, plugins, are, and I think the Playwright test suites have made a big difference there. So that's something in recent years that's really become more of a trend. It's been around a while, but something people have started doing.
I think it's like the kind of pragmatic approach of how to best spend your budget, whether that's monetary or time or your kind of unit testing budget. I usually don't say let's spend it on the CMS content, I usually say let's spend that on the custom APIs that we're building, or the integrations, or the booking systems, and all of those type of things that we've mentioned, Callum. So if we're extending Umbraco or building other kind of services around it, I would much rather use that unit testing budget there than does that bit of content make it from the CMS to the front end. Like, a totally valuable use of time if that's what you value, but we know it works.
The CMS itself has got an extensive suite of tests that you don't really want to go and retest yourself. And also because Umbraco is largely configured through an interface, there's not like a code first API you can go and construct things in super easily. It's not super easy to spin up like an Umbraco site with all of your config already there and run a test suite off the back of it. There's ways, but that's maybe a whole other topic. So I think people are typically using the testing budget, like you said, Carol, to test extension points and where we've customized or extended things, not core functionality. I
really like that term, testing budget, because it is a trade-off, isn't it? Writing tests, even though it's important, it takes time, and it's a balance. Is spending time writing tests on this thing, is that a good use of my time? So a testing budget is a good thing.
Yeah, we on projects tend to have kind of, as a dev team, a working agreement. Makes it sound really formal, right? But like, what's expected of us when we put pull requests in and what we expect from each other and stuff. And for different parts of the code, agree what weighting is acceptable. So in certain parts of the code, if there's no unit tests, we'll say, hey, I can't accept that PR, right? We really need to unit test that. But for certain parts of the code, if we've agreed that in advance, what those parameters are, then it means that there's less friction or anything around putting a PR in and it having tests or not having tests. And the best way to spend your team's budget, your client's budget, whatever, whether you're an in-house team or an agency or a freelancer, depending on how you work, agreeing up front what approach to that testing budget you want to take. We find that just having that conversation up front, the most pragmatic way to do it.
So obviously you've got your, like you said, that Umbraco is a .NET, ASP.NET website kind of thing. So it's all on .NET. With like configuration that would be stored, like presumably there's stuff that's not just content and it's some configuration stuff that might not necessarily be in the database. Is it everything that's not in the database that's not content, is that source controllable? As in, if you want to be able to have history in Git, use PR requests for config changes, is that possible?
Absolutely. So the structure of your site, in Umbraco terms, the document types that you'd be using to define the various pages and elements of your site. Umbraco comes shipped with a library called the Models Builder, which allows you to effectively generate models which represent that content, and that those models are source controllable. So they just, if you make a change in your local dev environment in your branch for a new feature, that you're going to send a new PR, those changes are serialized out to file to strongly typed models, and then you can then use those strongly typed models in your front end, in your views, and the entire chain all the way down is completely source controllable. And that was a change that came a few years ago, and it made a huge difference to the way it worked, because I personally, I'm a massive advocate for not having anything in kind of magic strings or fixed types that you just hard code into your views and things like that. So having strongly typed models that represent your content is a huge win. I mean, at the end of the day, you can sort of think of Umbraco as a fully featured document store almost. It's like a document DB, but with a lot of extra features like a view engine and versioning and all that kind of stuff. So it's you can structure your content for your site however you want to, with the added benefit that with these libraries you can then serialize your types. So if I'm working on a new feature to add e-commerce, for example, all the pages and all the types for that will live in my feature, and anyone who wants to work on it can merge those in. So
I actually, it's interesting that straight where you went when you heard that question, Carl, and I agree. Models Builder and no more magic strings was made me very happy. For unit testing as well, like we were just chatting about, but many other reasons. But I was actually thinking about the things maybe you don't want to have in config, but just like other .NET solutions, and those are a recurring theme here. But when it's in Azure or wherever else, you can do whatever you do with your .NET solution. So if you want to have them as configuration variables within your Azure environment so that they're not in source control, then you can do that. And that's usually what we do as well. You can have your default dev ones, and then your other environments just get overridden by what's in your CI/CD pipeline as well. So anything that you do with your .NET applications at the moment, you can still do within Umbraco.
So you mean you don't have to put your connection strings in source control?
No, makes me so happy. No more XML, no more con strings in the XML config.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the fun in that, though, right?
It's that time you get that warning from GitHub that you've put a connection string into your public repository, because they've got scanning right now for that kind of stuff. They've got pre-structured strings, and say, if you put a connection string in there, they will send you warnings. You don't need to worry about that anymore, and have for a while.
I can honestly say I've never seen that warning, which is probably a good thing.
I don't think it works for connection strings. It's API keys and stuff. But
No.
When Copilot was new, do you remember it was giving people's API keys away? That was fun.
I can imagine Copilot had a lot of security things like that, but scary. So we are kind of running out of time quite quickly. One question I did want to ask before we move over to DevPix is, and this is probably one for Lotte working there, pricing. We can't really not talk about pricing. How does that work?
It's very simple. The product that I'm in charge of costs nothing. So in developer relations, my job is supporting people who use the open source product. The reason why there is this entity that we've been referring to as HQ, that is the Umbraco HQ. It is the commercial enterprise that supports the open source product. It means that there is a team of people whose job it is to work on the open source product. But there are, in order to fund that, we have Umbraco Cloud, which is the hosted service, as I've mentioned. There is an e-commerce add-on. We call them packages, I think mainly so we didn't use the web plugin back in the day to just be different to WordPress, although maybe with hindsight that would have been easier communication. But anyway, we call them packages in our world. So we have Umbraco Commerce for e-commerce. We have Umbraco Forms for forms. You can guess where I'm going. Umbraco Workflow, which is if you want sophisticated workflows around your content. So you need some clever approval workflows. We have a hosted service called Hardcore, which is for just headless. So it's just a locked down headless version of the CMS. I apologise to the team that works very hard on whatever. I've forgotten. You can pay Umbraco for customer enterprise level support. There are lots of ways. You can pay for training. You can become, your company, your agency can become a partner, which means that you spend a certain amount of money with Umbraco, and as a result, you get certain things back for that. Lots of ways to spend money with Umbraco and support the ecosystem, but the key thing is that the CMS is open source, it is free, and all I ever hear is that will never change.
That's very cool. So even if I'm a business wanting to spin up a company website, if I don't want the extra support and hosting, I'll host it myself, that's free.
Yep. Completely free. And a lot of the community packages don't have license fees as well. So there's a lot of add-ons that you can get for free. Obviously, what comes with that is hopefully you have a realistic expectation of the level of support that you get from someone when they're doing it for goodwill, which is you're not entitled. But there are some very good community packages that are licensed. There's one called Usync that helps you serialize. It will serialize your entire Umbraco schema to disk so that you can check it into source control and deploy it that way as well, and other ones that I should probably mention but I forget. But yes, if you want to use the product and you host it yourself, you don't have to pay a penny.
That was one of the things that actually attracted when I first started working with Umbraco, sort of 11, 12, how many years ago, was, as an agency, you're obviously looking for the most value for the least amount of cost, and Umbraco was one of the only CMSs other than .NET Nuke as well, which is a terror. If you've ever used .NET Nuke, I wouldn't recommend it. I didn't enjoy my experience with it. But Umbraco was such an easy-to-use CMS system and allowed us to basically do whatever we wanted to. And the fact that it was open source and completely free was a no-brainer and hasn't changed since then.
13 years ago, I spent a Sunday evening helping a friend who wanted to build a website with a CMS, and we looked at .NET Nuke and Umbraco. And by the end of that Sunday evening, I was convinced on the Umbraco technology. Then I found the Umbraco London meetup, and by the end of that first meetup, I was convinced that these people made sense to me and were nice people and people I would like to spend my time with. And that's, yes, why I've used Umbraco ever since.
And now you work there.
And now I work there, yeah.
And what, just on the flip side of yes, you can get started for free and, cost effectively for clients of a certain size. What's been quite good is HQ's grown and the product's grown. And if I work with clients of maybe a different kind of scale now on certain size of projects, they don't want open source, or they're more reluctant to open source, I should say, because you have to prove that there is enterprise level support there. What do you get patches for security and all of those things? The answer is yes now, because HQ's grown. I don't know how many people are there, Lotte. I'm going to say over 100, but I could be lying.
No, it's about 140 now, I think.
Oh, geez, there you go. So that's comforting for some clients as well. I think that's what's quite good about this size in the format that they've got. Still open source, can still use it on small projects. But for the bigger projects that need that enterprise level support and need that comfort and security, that's now there and supported as well, which is nice. A bit like .NET. .NET being open source, but still well supported, and having a big team around it and having Microsoft behind it is what will let a lot of clients choose it.
Awesome. So shall we, I think everyone said they had a dev tip. Shall we move over to dev tip or dev tips or picks? It could be either. Who would like to go first?
Okay, mine was one that someone recommended to me on Twitter, which is a Windows app called DevToys, which I just installed. I'd never heard about it before, but it's such a useful thing. It's open source, so you can go and look at the code for it. But it basically has a bunch of converters, a bunch of formatters for standard types. So if you want to look at, JSON structure for a document and make it pretty, or you want to generate a token or a hash key, or you want to generate passwords, it has all these kind of configurable things. And I've been playing around with it recently, and it's just one of those things that where you previously would have a bunch of websites that you'd go to prettify your JSON or something like that. This is now my all-in-one place to go to just do stuff with tokens or documents or structure, which is excellent.
That might have actually been me that you heard it from, because that was my last dev tip as well, and I posted it
Was
quite
it?
heavily on
Okay.
social media.
Yeah.
No, I'd highly recommended, and obviously we'll include it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's really good.
Who's next?
I'll go. I'm going to cheat and go for something not that techy. Well, yeah, anyway. And say meetups. We spoke about meetups so much. All of us here run meetups. I'd say that's been the biggest accelerator, I'd say, in my career in terms of knowledge and just progression, has since I started going to meetups, attending them, speaking at them, meeting folks like these lovely folks at conferences. So I'd say that's probably the biggest tip, is go along. It's scary. I know it can be scary at first, and we might seem like really outgoing people, but I know at least a few of us are definitely introverts, and it takes a bit of effort. But I'd say give it a go. Find your local ones. Find your local niche and go along. It can make a real difference to your career.
Yeah, totally. Plus that, I didn't realise there were, like, every one of us is usually a group organiser.
Yep.
That's pretty cool, actually. But yeah, definitely echo that, because that's what with .NET Oxford I've found, that I say it's scary, but it's kind of like it's incrementally scary. So if you just like doing a little bit, like turn up, even if you don't talk to anyone, then sit there and just enjoy it. But then start to talk to people, just go more often, and then you'll just start to make more friends. It's just meetups are such a great community thing.
Absolutely, and if you want to get into talking, like speaking at meetups is such a great way, because it's such a small community, more often than not, other than maybe the pandemic times when everything was Zoomed. But nowadays, you can speak in front of a room of 20, 30 people if you're lucky, and you generally might know a few of them, but they'll all be there to give you feedback. It's been one of the best ways to kind of get into speaking. You don't want your first talk you ever deliver to be on an NDC or, a Microsoft Dev or Build or one of those big conferences. Start at meetups and start small, and it's a great way of just kind of refining that process.
My tip, which I think 99% of the people listening will know, but I gave a talk at a London.NET user group last year, and during that I did a demo, and I did this thing, and someone, I won't say his name, but he's a big name in the Microsoft world, 8 years MVP, talks all over the world. He was like, what magic did you just do? And all I'd done was in Windows Explorer, I'd typed CMD into the address bar to open a command prompt where I was. Now, a lot of people know that, but Carl, I shouldn't name it.
No.
There you go. So
I'm trying that out right now.
I mean, it does work.
Oh my god, that's
there
so
we go.
cool.
You see, it's sometimes we make assumptions that everyone knows what we know, but it turns out we don't.
You can do this for any program that's actually in your path. So cmd.exe is just the name. So if you've got like vscode.exe in your path, you can just type VS Code and it'll open there as well.
The nice thing about that, though, not just that it opens CMD, but it opens it at the path that you're in, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
You're welcome.
It's not working for me. It's just actually doing a Google search.
Are you on a Mac?
No.
Sorry, I know you're not.
Did you say Explorer then?
Yeah, Windows Explorer. A good old File Explorer.
Windows. So I was thinking browser.
Yeah.
That's why.
No, so go and find your directory that you're in that you want to open a command prompt in. You just type CMD. And sorry, I have used the word just, but I mean it is literally typing 3 letters into the address bar.
I will allow it.
Thank you very much. My hyperbole has been forgiven.
It has worked. I was obviously not listening properly. I would heard
okay.
Explorer as in Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me, this isn't my dev tip, but I actually use, and I'll include this in the show notes as well, but rather than Windows Explorer, I use a tool called, it's Explorer 2, and it's such a brilliant replacement. It does like split pane, like the Commander style split pane, and I've used that for years. I don't think I've opened Windows Explorer in a very long time.
Oh, that's cool. Good know that one.
Should I do my dev tip? I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, but I have justification. My dev tool, my recommended number one tool to master, is GitHub. Now, hear me out. This is the one thing that has made the biggest difference to my developer workflow in the last 2 or 3 years. There's so many hidden keyboard shortcuts and things that people don't know about. Press T on any repo and you can do a file name search. Press dot and it opens VS Code in the browser. GitHub code spaces I use on a daily basis when I don't want to spin up a repo, and it just creates an environment for me directly in the cloud. GitHub Copilot has become an integral part of my workflow, and more recently GitHub Copilot Workspace, which is in limited preview right now, but you can create an issue and let Copilot go and make code changes for you. So you can say, we need to add a new parameter to this method, and it needs to, make sure it's not null and do a couple of these things. And it will go and write the code changes for you, raise a pull request and everything. Like, it's mind-blowingly amazing. So GitHub Copilot Workspace specifically, and the Copilot tools there are awesome, but just master GitHub. It's when someone on my team asks for help with something and I'm like, I don't know, but I know how to find out. So we can find the name of a class and with a couple of clicks go find that in the source in GitHub, and it's a true game changer. So that's my
I totally agree. See, especially working with an open source product quite a bit. So even if I'm not using GitHub, it's not something about my solution, but if it's someone you'll have the same as Umbraco MVPs, people in your workplace will come and ask you a question like, Carol, how does Umbraco do thing? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm really good at using GitHub search. So then you can go into the Umbraco CMS repo and search how Umbraco does it. And it's quite a big solution. So if you don't master those search tools, like you say, Callum, it could probably take quite a long time. But once you know how to use GitHub, like, it can totally accelerate how quickly you can find these things. And I didn't know about the workspaces thing. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's a few things I need to try though. I really like the GitHub command line. It's just a really nice command line.
Yeah, it probably won't make it in time, but just to plug our meetup, we have April Yoho, who's the GitHub lead dev avocado, coming to our .NET meetup in Bristol next week, and that's going to be a really good talk. But I don't know if your podcast will be out in time for that one or not. It's next Thursday.
It's hard to tell. It depends how much time I get.
Yeah,
it'll be like a week or two, that kind of time frame. So I think that's everyone gone, isn't it? So it's just me left. So my dev tip is basically, it's a YouTube video I've just done this about, but I've used the Pomodoro technique for like quite a while on and off, and I think that makes quite a big difference to my productivity. One thing I've started doing more recently is basically taking notes while I do the Pomodoros. So it just literally just Notepad. And I don't keep those notes, I just use them for the day, because I started keeping them, but then I realised I'd never look back, so there's no point. But I start the day, I start my first Pomodoro, type goal, and just write what the goal is for that one Pomodoro. In fact, stepping back a bit, for those that don't know, a Pomodoro is basically 25 minutes. You set a Pomodoro timer, and for that 25 minutes, you can't do anything but that goal, the task in hand. You can't check emails, you can't check Twitter, you can't go and get a coffee. I was going to say you can't go to the loo, but I suppose if you're desperate, you maybe do that. I don't know. But the idea is it's 25 minutes of pure focus time. And at the end, you have like a 5 or 10 minute break. But I found that like what makes a big difference for me is I have it on my third monitor. I just have Notepad up. I would type my goal for that 25 minutes. It can be succinct, a very small thing, but it doesn't have to be the entire feature. It's just something realistic that I can do within that 25 minutes. So I've got a bit of a, what's the law, Parkinson's law, where, time expands to fit. It's like the reverse Parkinson's law, where I've got 25 minutes to do that. That makes me more focused. And then when I finish, I just write a result. I was like, yes, I'm on to do it. And quite often I put an emoji next to that entry just to symbolise my feelings about that. And at the end of the day, I've got a list of them all, or the Pomodoros I've done. And basically because of these emojis, I can see at a glance how my day went, how I felt my day went, whether there's fire emotes or maybe really angry emotes, something like that. And it just really, I've found since doing that, it's made a big difference to my productivity, especially on days where if I'm getting more distracted, there's lots of like Teams things popping up. By using the Pomodoro technique, it just helps me stop getting distracted during that day. And that's me. Sorry that I was rambling for quite a while then, but I will link in the show notes to all the things we've mentioned for the dev tips, and also that it's quite a short video, but I demonstrate how I do it in Notepad. So before we wrap up, is there anything else anyone wants to mention? I think we've covered a lot of stuff, but...
UK Fest in November, Callum?
I felt dirty plugging anything like that, but...
Oh, you can plug anything you want.
Can I do a plug? So not only are we hosting the Umbraco UK Festival, which is a Umbraco conference about Umbraco in the UK in London in November, we are also hosting a .NET and Azure event called Azure Underground in November. So that's on November 7th, and Umbraco UK Festival is on November 8th in London. And we'd love to see as many people as possible there. So I'll make sure Dan has links to put down below as well. But we have an open CFP, we have open ticket sales for both events, and we'd love to see as many people there as possible.
Awesome stuff. I've got a feeling that this list of show notes is going to be a long list of links, but yes, we'll include all the stuff we've mentioned in the show notes. So with that, just a massive thank you everyone for joining me. It's been, I've got to say, I do love these group episodes. It's really good fun, and I've enjoyed geeking out on Umbraco. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. I'm going to have to keep the original mistake, aren't I, just for context.
I think so.
Thank you, mate.
Yeah.
No, thanks for having us. It's been great. It's a good excuse to chat to these folks that I already know, and obviously good to get chatting to yourself as well.
Likewise. Yes. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, it's only taken us 2.5, 3 years to organise, so
we made it.
We got there in the end. Although I'm going to be so nervous about when we stop recording, me checking to make sure it's actually recorded properly. Because after all this and all this planning and all these years, the recording failed. Imagine that. Oh, wow. No pressure. I will ping you all and let you know when I check it.
Great.
Thank you.
So everyone is now able to turn the fans back on.
Woo!
I've had my AC on silent mode the entire time, so it's...
Have you? I haven't. I've watched myself getting slightly more glistening as
my
the day
glasses
goes.
steamed up a few times because